All right. Let's do here. Yeah. Sorry, I don't need that. I lost my... All right, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Hopefully you got enough to eat. Everybody doing well? Announcement for tomorrow's Geo tour from the Protheros again. Second time that the bus loads at 8:45 and departs at 9 o'clock at the Westin, the host hotel where we've been. So that's on those, if you weren't there last night, 191 North Los Robles. 8:45, meet there, depart at 9 sharp. If you miss it, it's a long walk. And by the way, if you're wondering where that cool looking thing came from, just look straight up. It's the spaceship Beckman. The mothership is here. Richard, I understand you were attacked by some crazed evangelists or something, or?
that joke's going the rounds on Twitter. Yeah.
Yes. So you said unto him, "Go forth and multiply," but not in those words.
I think the joke that's out there is you should see the other guy.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So Jared Diamond was just here speaking about. The odds are above 50% of people 65 and older falling, and well...
You really do cheer me up, Michael.
I'm just, citing the data. It's, speaking of which, I thought I'd start us off. By the way, we'll do this for a while, and then if we have time, we'll take a few questions from the audience. No speeches. Last week, the Pew Forum published a new study of 35,000 adult Americans, revealing that the nuns, once again, are the fastest growing religious cohort in America. That is the religiously unaffiliated, the nuns, so-called N-O-N-E-S. Yeah, sorry, those of you not used to that jargon. So it went from about 7% to about 23% in the last 20 years. And then up to 34% of all Americans who are millennials, that is born after 1981. So if you take that there's 245 million adult Americans, that's 56 million religiously unaffiliated adults of all ages. That's more than Protestants or Catholics. Are we winning?
We're going to have to, that's very good news, but we're going to have to get used to that word nuns more and more. And in order to forestall misunderstanding, could we change it to knowns or something like that? Because otherwise, I told the story before, but I've got a friend who was in hospital, a woman friend, and she was in hospital, and the nurses were taking down her details, and they were ticking off things, and they came to religion, so she said none. And that was fine, and then later she overheard two of the nurses gossiping about her. And one said to the other, "She doesn't look like a nun."
Yes, okay, we need a new word. Well, you're good at that, coining new words. Well, unchurched is what sociologists call it. That's fine.
One of the problems is that the so-called nuns often give up religion for something even worse.
Or laterally crazy.
They take up Deepak Chopra or something like that.
Yes. Well, the idea of spiritual, but not religious, that's sort of the little box, the other box that people tick. And of course, our friend Sam Harris is trying to change that by saying something like meditation might replace it. That's not my thing, probably not your thing, but maybe there's something.
I tried it once.
You did?
It didn't do anything for me, but then I'm not very persistent, perhaps.
Well, you tried the God module like I did too, didn't you?
Yes.
Michael Persinger's?
Didn't do anything for me at all.
You didn't have? I had a mini out-of-body experience, but I'm not sure it was different from the ones I normally have. When I'm out cycling for a long time.
Well, one thing is you're in total darkness,
yeah.
Which is an unusual, and I think I got sort of vaguely, I sort of saw shapes and things, but I think if you're in total darkness, you probably do anyway. So
I did.
When I did that, you know what I'm talking about. This is this Canadian guy called Michael Persinger, who puts a motorcycle helmet on you, and he passes magnetic field through your head. And he already knows that some 20% of people don't respond. And the BBC flew me out there to do this test. And they wanted a control experiment. So being television, the control experiment was just me and one other guy. This other guy was a local vicar. And so when Persinger did the test on me, there was no result. And he reported afterwards that my EEG rhythms were typical of the 20% who don't respond. The vicar claimed to have no response. But what Persinger reported was that his EEG waves were classic responder. And it looked as though from his EEG rhythms he was deliberately trying to suppress the experience that Persinger was inducing. He did not want it to be possible for magnetic fields to induce religious experience in him. I was looking forward to a religious experience.
Persinger certainly has control problems with his research, as he's been criticized, but his idea is that if there is such a thing as spiritual experiences, the paranormal, whatever, it has a neurological explanation, a natural explanation.
Which the vicar presumably wouldn't like. I mean, that does make a kind of sense, yeah.
Well, so, I mean, this gets us to this problem that we've discussed many times. I mean, what do we mean by the paranormal, the supernatural? How would you know if something was actually paranormal or supernatural? I'm fond of saying these are just linguistic placeholders, just words we plug in when we can't explain something until we have an explanation. And then when you have an explanation, well, it's just neuroscience, or it's just dopamine, or it's serotonin, or it's oxytocin, or whatever it is, and it's not this, woo-woo stuff. So the words are just replacing it, and the more of those gaps we fill in, there's fewer of those kinds of words you need to use.
Well, that's entirely plausible to me, but as a scientist, we sometimes pay lip service to the idea that we are open-minded, and so if there was really evidence for, let's say, a God, we would accept it. And the hypothetical case, which I've always thought of, some sort of, I don't know, deep Paul Robeson voice thundering out of the clouds and saying, "I exist," and or Jesus coming back in golden chariots and things like that. For a long time, I paid lip service to the idea that if that happened, I would promptly say, yes, I'm a believer. But I'm now not so sure because, I wasn't here for Jamie Ian Swiss's performance last night, but I've seen him before. And a really good conjurer like that produces effects which seem to me to be supernatural. I know they're not, but they're so good, they're so convincing, that if this 900-foot-high Jesus figure did appear...
Could be David Copperfield.
Well, yes, actually. I mean, if he can make the Eiffel Tower disappear...
right.
So, and that led me to sort of feel, well, the very idea of something supernatural is incoherent. I mean, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything to me now.
Right.
I think that if I did see this 900-foot-high Jesus, my first thought would be I'm hallucinating, I'm dreaming, I'm the victim of a conjuring trick, if not by David Copperfield, by some alien intelligence, something like that. I mean, almost anything is more plausible. Or else one could say, as I think you've just said, Michael, that what you might think of as supernatural is just that which we don't yet understand, and we've got to incorporate it into our science. And the science of the future will incorporate that.
Even I think to the point that would explain God. If there is a God of the Old Testament that created everything or whatever, how did he do it? I mean, he had to, at some point, come into contact with the particles in the universe,
yes,
and affect them in some way that's measurable. So he's using this force or that for, he uses electromagnetism, or he uses the weak nuclear force to do this with atoms. How is that any different from just describing it like scientists do? And then it would just be an extraterrestrial intelligence of some sort of super advanced.
Yes, I mean, I think that I wouldn't be too unhappy with the idea that an extraterrestrial intelligence intervened at some point. But the sticking point for me would be that extraterrestrial intelligence would have to have evolved itself by something like a Darwinian process. I don't think it's plausible that an extraterrestrial intelligence planted life here in a sort of science fiction-y way. But if it did, then that's not completely beyond my worldview, because that extraterrestrial intelligence itself would have to have evolved. I was once on a television program with a man called Ben Stein, who,
Expelled, yes.
whom I hadn't heard of, and he asked me, could I imagine any circumstances in which life on this planet might have been intelligently designed? So I gave the honest answer. I bent over backwards to think, well, what might convince me? Well, what might it look like if intelligent design had done something on this planet? And I said, it would have to be an extraterrestrial intelligence, which would have to have evolved. That's the point for me, that I don't mind if I'm almost sure there is extraterrestrial intelligence, but it's got to have evolved. It doesn't just happen.
Well, but that just pushes the causal chain back one more link.
You can push it back as many links as you like, but at some point you've got to stop. And the stopping point is that the original one has got to have evolved by a slow, gradual, incremental process from primordial simplicity.
Of course, the theist just says, well, you have to stop the causal chain somewhere, so we stop at God and we don't.
No, that's just silly, because it doesn't explain anything. The point is that evolution does explain, and you can push the causal chain back to aliens that built this world and aliens that built that world, but finally, the ultimate aliens have got to have evolved. They've got to have come from some primordial simplicity. They can't have just suddenly sprung into existence.
On your 1 to 7 scale of where you are on the God question, you're still a 6?
6.9.
6.9. I'm wondering if you're persuaded by any of our friend, the late great Vic Stenger's arguments that, in fact, God is a testable hypothesis.
Yes, I mean, I like his approach. It's sort of saying, in absolute strict logic, you can't disprove it. But if you've been trying sufficiently hard for sufficiently long, it becomes perverse to say that anything other than it's been disproved.
So, for example, if there is a God and he's good, then the universe should have certain characteristics that don't look like ours. Why is there evil? Those
that
sorts
kind
of
of
things.
thing, yes.
So those kinds of arguments, I think, do mount up against the God hypothesis.
Yes.
And the 6.9
Yeah.
then. 6.9, okay.
Yes.
And as you go along, you can add more digits.
Add another 9, yes, yes.
Let's talk about the problem that I think is more serious of Islam, the West's response to it. As you know, I mean, you're a liberal, and a lot of our friends are liberals, and yet most liberals seem to be on the side of treating Islam with respect. Free speech should only go so far. As you know, Ayaan Hirsi Ali gets disinvited, her honorary doctorate taken away, and so on, because she's critical of Islam. Do you think the left has missed it on this one?
Yes. It looks to me as though we on the left are so terrified of being thought racist that we will forsake all our other liberal principles in order to subjugate them below the fear of racism. Totally illogical. Islam is not a race. If something is if you can convert to something or apostatize out of it, then it's not a race.
Yes, okay. So, but of course, bigotry can apply to many different groups, not just races, of pretty much any way we want to define it. So they would still argue it's still wrong to be, treating all Muslims this way or something. Or
which, of course, we don't do anyway.
Yeah.
But what's so striking about the left in the West is the way the other principles, things like feminism, things like hostility to misogyny. Misogyny in Islam gets a free pass because it's Islam, and that's what really gets me.
So you don't have any problems criticizing the practices of other cultures just because, well, would it not be sort of imperialistic for us in the West to go to, say, Somalia and say, you shouldn't do this?
Yes, that would be. I wouldn't say you shouldn't do this, but I would say there is no evidence for your particular God, and I would be perfectly happy to have an argument. It would be a respectful argument. It would be a friendly argument. We could have a drink together. But I would not...
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't think that respect goes so far as to abandon our scientific principles when we're talking about matters of scientific fact. There are anthropologists, I'm told, who are so wedded to the idea of immersing themselves in the culture that they're studying that they will not only say, in order to understand the culture that I'm studying, I need to understand that they think the moon is a few feet above the treetops. That's, of course, fine. A good anthropologist really does immerse herself in the entire culture and accepts as part of the mutually intelligible parts of the culture things that she knows are actually absurd in the scientific sense. It really is true that the moon is, whatever it is, 250,000 miles away. But there are anthropologists who take this so seriously that they will even say what we call the fact that the moon is 250,000 miles away is just our imperialistic white Western science. And that's where I part vigorous company with them.
Now, earlier, Carol Tavris made the point that if you just go in and say you must stop female genital mutilation, this is wrong, you pass a law, boom, you end it. In that culture, there's a lot of these girls who then will not grow up to get married, they'll be economically unempowered, they will lose status and so on in that particular culture. So we can't just educate them on that. You'd actually have to change the culture considerably, make them much more westernized, and then are we not back to the, imperial, we're making it like this.
I mean, I guess that is a good point. Nicholas Humphrey wrote a very, very radical essay called What Shall We Tell the Children? Has anybody read that? It's a remarkable essay about this sort of point, and he talks about the so-called Ice Maiden, which was an archaeological discovery of a young woman in the Andes who about 600 years ago had been sacrificed to the sun god, and the archaeologists have dug this up, and he said that he saw a television program about this in which the television commentary tried to immerse itself in the sun god culture of this young woman by saying, can you imagine the excitement of this girl as she knew she was being sacrificed and she was doing it for the good of her god, and so on. And Nick Humphrey said, how dare you say this poor young girl is looking forward to being sacrificed and having her heart torn out and things.
Presumably, if we asked her, she would say, no, I would not like this to be done to me.
Presumably. That is my fairly strong belief, yes.
Of course, there are people who are willing to die for certain beliefs. Yeah. So if you say, for example, well, just ask the women there how they feel about it, a lot of them might say, well, I do want to do this, because this is, they don't know any different or something like that. So once again, we're back into, well, we got to go in there and educate them properly to show them that's the incorrect answer.
I think where radical female genital mutilation is concerned, I think I'm going to stick my neck out and say I'm an old-fashioned imperialist.
Yeah, okay, good. I would agree. Jared was talking about earlier the ending of violence in Papua New Guinea. Often it just came down to the government had to come in with guns and say, you will not do this anymore, fight, with spears. They took their weapons away and said, you stop it or we'll shoot you. Or the ending of sati in India, the burning of widows. This was done by the British imperialists that went in there and said, you stop doing this. And they said, well, this is our culture. I forget the general's name there. And he said, well, we have a cultural tradition too. People that burn women, we hang them. And you practice your tradition and we will practice our tradition. Well, I put it, in part put an end to it. Sometimes you have to use violence to end violence, let's say. So
I feel a bit queasy about that. But
yes, I understand, but that's why I'm sort of... Yeah. In other words, conservatives who argue that you need a strong foreign policy because there are bad people in the world, you can't educate them. We're never going to educate ISIS out of destroying 3,000-year-old buildings and treating women like cattle and so on. We're not going to talk them out of it. We just have to go in with boots on the ground to stop them. How comfortable are you with that?
I'm not comfortable with it, and I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I guess I'm burned by the experience of the Iraq War, where I was strongly against it, and I think rightly so. I think we do have to be very, very cautious before boots on the ground in that sort of situation. But I mean, I do think ISIS is one of the great evils that the world has ever seen, and it's very hard not to succumb to the temptation to.
Well, in part, that's probably one we should be in, but Obama almost can't because of all the stuff that Bush got us into in the first place.
Yes, yeah.
And it continues to go back. I mean, Clinton intervened in Somalia by sending troops in to Mogadishu, ending in this catastrophe with the Black Hawk Down and the American troops dragged through the streets, and it was a total embarrassment, and he was severely criticized. So when Rwanda happened, he didn't act in time, and 800,000
So
died.
there's a kind of crazy pendulum swing, yes.
Not just conservatives, but liberal. You know, it's a hard problem. And so that gets us to the problem of, well, I mean, in a way, we're assuming that there are really moral values we think are right. You know, women should not be treated that way. Why would we think that? Is this just a random Western idea, or have we derived this through experience over centuries? You know, I think this is a discoverable thing. You can just ask people how they like to be treated. And therefore, there's a march, there's a moral arc, you know, we're progressing. Don't we have a moral obligation to help people that are suffering and you know, and try to push our values that way, whichever way, non-violently or whatever?
It's hard to say no, and back comes the reply, well, this is just your moral values, which are different from theirs. I frequently am attacked by religious people. Whenever I say anything moral at all, they say, well, how can you talk about anything moral because you don't have any absolute moral standards? And I guess in a sense that's right. But the closest I come to absolute moral standards would be the avoidance of suffering by sentient beings.
Why is that not? Why not use the word absolute? It's an objective moral value. You can just ask the sentient being who's suffering, do they want to continue suffering? No. That's your answer. Why is that not? Why can't we tell the theist, our values are just as objective as yours, or more?
Because the operational test is to ask the sufferer. Yeah. This girl who was sacrificed in the Andes, what if the television documentary had been right and she actually did say, yes, I want to be sacrificed.
I know, right, I know.
I would put my shirt on her saying, I don't want to be sacrificed, but...
she might be brainwashed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
Well, the people who are going to fight for ISIS pretty much have got, I mean, you know, they are
right.
doing things that seem to be utterly inhuman, and the young women who go up to be their brides, I mean, they are almost giving the answer, we want to suffer. And imagine being a bride to one of those people.
But of course, they don't think of it as suffering. They're thinking, you know, they're making this ultimate sacrifice. They get the payoff at the end. Their families are taken care of. They get to go to heaven and so forth. So they're just simply wrong. Their worldview is incorrect.
Well, that's what you say, but that's what I say. But we're treading difficult ground here.
Yeah, I know. So, and that gets us to this question. As you know, you wrote in The Selfish Gene that that we're sort of slaves to natural selection. To be moral, you have to overthrow our. I forget the way you phrased it, but you know, we have to overcome our selfishness and so on. Franz de Waal calls it the thin veneer theory of morality. That he sort of categorizes it, just a way of talking about it. That, you know, for you, human nature is basically fairly beastie and selfish, and we have a thin veneer of civilization that kind of keeps the beast down. Do you still hold?
I don't think I ever did really hold that, but maybe I misphrased it.
Well, just say what it is you do.
Okay, I mean, I think Franz de Waal is deeply confused.
Okay.
He's not here, is he?
No.
I wouldn't mind, actually. I think that I wouldn't say he's one of those who's read The Selfish Gene by title only, but a lot of people think The Selfish Gene is about selfishness. It's actually mostly about altruism, and it's about how altruistic individuals can be programmed to be altruistic by selfish genes. So all of altruism in the animal kingdom can be explained by selfish genes, and is. And I think that's what Frans de Waal doesn't get. I am prepared to admit, though, that humans do seem to be quite unusual in that we're just a bit too nice. And that does require a bit of an explanation. I think it's not totally difficult to give one. But
By nice, you mean we can be exploited by other?
well, we show more empathy, more sympathy, more altruism than at least a naive interpretation of Darwinian natural selection
Well,
would.
group selection is the answer of Ed Wilson.
Well, it's bollocks. Group selection is just call it kin selection, which is what we've been calling it ever since 1964. It works very well. Kin selection and reciprocal altruism are the two ways in which Darwinism explains altruism. And in order to explain super niceness in humans, which I think we probably have to do, we need to generalize from those two explanations of kin selection and reciprocal altruism. And I think we can do that. I think we can do it by saying that, in effect, it's a sort of mistake. We're programmed by natural selection in our wild ancestors to be good to close relatives and to be good to potential reciprocators. Now, that doesn't mean that we're programmed to cognitively know what's good for our genes. Instead, we're programmed with rules of thumb which work under the normal environmental conditions. So if our wild ancestors lived in conditions where they went around in small kin groups, which they probably did, and small groups where they were going to meet again and again the same individuals, therefore be in a position to reciprocate and to expect reciprocation back, then the rule of thumb that natural selection would have built into us would have been, be nice to everyone you meet. That rule
unless they're hostile back, and then you should.
Something like that, yes. Well, now, that rule of thumb is what's built into all of us. We no longer live in small villages. We no longer live in small bands. But the rule of thumb is still in us, is still in our brains. And so when we see somebody starving or when we see somebody in great distress, we have an overwhelming desire to help them, which in our wild state would have meant an overwhelming desire to help close relatives.
Is that always true? If you hear a screaming baby on the plane, you want to rush over to help, or do you want to just move your seat?
Well, no, I mean, it possibly not, but to the extent that it is true, that's what I'm trying to explain.
Okay, I see.
If you want to go and kill the screaming baby, then that's easier to explain. I'm trying to explain the case where you see a starving child, or you see a picture of a starving child in an Oxfam advertisement, and the child has great big wide eyes and crying, and you immediately give money. That on the face of it is a very un-Darwinian thing to do. And so, but it's not un-Darwinian if you think that it's a kind of mistake, in the same sort of way as a foster parent bird feeding a cuckoo is a mistake. The instinct to drop food into a gaping beak, which is what all parent birds of that kind have, that instinct kicks in, and so they feed cuckoos. In the same way, we have an instinct to be nice, dating from our past when we lived in small villages. It's like the instinct, it's like the lust for sex. We have a lust for sex because, for Darwinian reasons, sex tends to lead to babies. Nowadays, sex doesn't lead to babies usually, but we still have the same lust for sex. The rule of thumb is still in us, and it's just the same with the lust to be nice.
But why call it a mistake? Because that makes it sound like we don't have true morality, or we're not really good.
It's a mistake from a Darwinian point of view,
Okay, all right.
And it's very much not a mistake from everything that we as humans hold dear.
Wait, it's not a mistake from a Darwinian point of view in the ancestral environment.
No, that's
Okay,
right.
Right, so
It's
that's our nature.
From a Darwinian point of view, it's a mistake in the same sense, I'm suggesting, in the same sense as it's a mistake when a parent reed warbler feeds a baby cuckoo.
Okay.
It's a mistake. The adult reed warbler has in its brain a rule of thumb which in normal circumstances results in feeding its own offspring. But the rule of thumb isn't feed your own offspring. The rule of thumb is feed squawking things in your nest. So if a cuckoo is a squawking thing in a nest, which it is, you just feed it.
Yes.
And so it's a mistake in that sense.
But I guess what troubles me about that is that, okay, so just as a practical matter, when you're debating a theist and they say, well, you don't believe in real morality, and Dawkins just says real altruism or niceness is a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. We have the deep capacity to want to bond, attach, and love others.
It is a mistake in a Darwinian sense, but it's very much not a mistake from a point of view of the kind of human morality which we all believe in. It's a blessed mistake. It's a wonderful mistake.
Okay. But, okay, all right. I mean, I just prefer to call it, we're truly by nature, we have a good side. We have an altruistic side. We
have a good side,
yeah.
And that good side is a Darwinian mistake, but it's very, very, very good. I mean, nobody wants to live in a Darwinian world. That would be appalling.
Well, but not the good part of the Darwinian world. The part where you're...
Well, okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you see where I'm going with this. I mean, I'm trying to make a case for us atheists, secularists, that even a purely evolutionary biological model, you can still get real morality. We can't just pretend to be nice to our fellow group members, even strangers or expanded. You actually have to feel it. So Trivers' self-deception model. And so if you really believe it, even if you call it self-deception, but you really believe that I really feel good about helping somebody else.
So do I.
Why is that not just real morality? Why not just...
No, we're playing with words.
Yes.
You feel good about it. It's real morality by the standards of moral philosophers, by the standards of all good people. It is real morality. We as Darwinians are charged with the task of explaining how we get real morality, because real morality is, on the face of it, not a very Darwinian thing to have. So we need an explanation. I've just given you one. And I'm delighted that we've got it. It is real, but it's not Darwinian.
On another topic of interest of late, when people like Stephen Hawking have said, aliens will be evil, we should not be sending signals out or whatever, assuming ETs would be evolving by natural selection on some other planet, surely they would they not have a suite of moral emotions like ourselves? And
I wouldn't trust that. I wouldn't know. But I think that Stephen Hawking is being completely alarmist about that. If we ever encounter aliens, it will be radio waves. It won't be physical bodies. When you think of the enormous distances that have to be travelled in order to get to.
Well, I think he meant if we did encounter them.
Yes, but I think what he was actually saying, we should stop broadcasting into space for fear of alerting
yes, that's right.
Aliens to our existence. But if we ever did alert aliens to our existence, it would take 1 million years for them to get here.
Well, if the singularitarians are right, we might still be around, uploaded in some computer. But the deeper question is would they not evolve something like moral, if they're social primates or whatever we would call them, would they not evolve a suite of emotions? They might have a good side, they might have a dark side or something like that. But would they actually end up wanting to colonize us? Because would the principle of colonizing actually succeed in becoming a spacefaring civilization?
I mean, if we're talking about would they have a morality that would respect us? And
Yeah.
Do you feel compunction stepping on a cockroach?
No.
I mean, if they've got enough mental capacity to get here, they would be as much superior to us as we are to cockroaches. Otherwise, they wouldn't get here.
Okay. So we should be worried. Well, not worried.
No, but well,
the million-year thing, but
the million-year thing.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Or would you travel 1 million miles would you travel for 1 million years in order to step on a cockroach?
Yeah, no, right. Maybe 100 light years.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about the future of science and humanity so far. Almost impossible to answer the question of, if you look at the history of science, we were colossally wrong about this, but now we're reasonably confident about certain things. We're probably wrong about a lot of things. Any thoughts about some of the big things we are pretty confident in that we could be wrong on? I mean, if you knew, you would know.
Oh gosh, yes,
Yeah.
if I knew,
I mean,
yes.
it seems unlikely, say, the theory of evolution would get tweaked very much.
Yes. Not only, I mean, I don't think there'll ever be another theory, even for life anywhere else in the universe. I'm that rash about that. I've stuck my neck out to the extent that if there's life anywhere in the universe, I bet my shirt it's Darwinian life. Not exactly, of course. I'm interested in questions like, does the genetics have to be digital, which I suspect it probably does. So I don't think we're wrong about evolution. We're wrong about details, I'm sure, yes. What might we be wrong about?
Well, but the physical sciences, I mean...
I don't know enough about physical sciences. I mean, I'm a sort of child with wide open eyes where physical sciences are concerned, and I love trying to learn about it, but I don't have enough knowledge of what we think we do know in order to guess what we might be wrong about.
And we've been talking about the decline of violence and the expansion of the moral sphere, and it seems like things are getting better. And yet, Don Prothero showed us, once we get to 10 billion people, species extinction and global climate change and all. It seems like there's sort of a balance whether you should be an optimist or pessimist at this point as we start the 21st century here.
Yes, Martin Rees thinks we've got a 50% chance of making it through the 21st century.
Right.
And I think that among his anxieties are the increasing availability of weapons of mass destruction, like, say, biological warfare weapons, moving out of the control of large, rich governments who, however wrong they may be, at least are sort of big controlling things who don't want to die, into getting into the hands of people who actually want to die.
Right, they're not rational actors.
That's right. So it's one thing to have weapons of mass destruction, weapons of huge deterrence, on the assumption that both sides are rational actors, and you can do a bit of game theory. But if one side thinks that by dying they're going to press the button and get themselves straight to paradise, that does give grounds for pessimism. I mean, ISIS have said to be boasting that they're going to buy a nuclear weapon from Pakistan. Pakistan's already pretty much of a failed state. So there are grounds for pessimism, it seems to me.
And therefore, we probably do need a strong security state and a strong NSA, which also worries me, as I presume it does you as well.
What's NSA?
Oh, the National Security Agency, the spooks, the people
Yes,
listening to to our emails, reading our emails, and
Yeah. Yes, I suppose that's right. Yeah. Does that mean what it says? No time remaining.
Oh well, we've got about 6 minutes.
Okay.
Why don't we take a couple of questions from the audience? If anybody would like to jump up and go ahead. If you want to just shout it out, go ahead. We'll repeat it.
Yeah, I'm just from this morning, from just the general context of the affairs. It seems to me like we need intelligent design right now. And I'm kind of confused as to why we care about what happened 10 million or 7,000 years ago when what we do right now is Lamarckian. It's not Darwinian. We have enormous plasticity in our brain. We learn things, pass them on to our children, which is why we want. Okay, and so the question is there not some dialectic that we can develop for saying that if we think intelligently about things, it doesn't make a difference what happened in the past, let's forward.
What do you think?
Well, I actually have said before that I think what we need is more intelligent design. We need to design our morality intelligently, and a lot of people are trying to do that, and I suppose moral philosophers have been trying to do it for a long time. The difficulty is a political one of having designed the society in which you wish to live and having designed the morality under which you wish to live, is persuading everybody to adopt it, and that is a political problem.
Well, we know that democracies are better than theocracies or dictatorships in terms of the survival and flourishing of sentient beings. So should we not, again, back to this foreign policy question, should we not have a doctrine of spreading democracy? Maybe not violently, but to the extent that we can support political leaders that are more prone toward democracy.
I mean, that sounds awfully like George W. Bush,
yes,
doesn't it?
I know, well.
It kind of worries me that I guess I've kind of been sensitized to that sort of language.
Yeah.
I suppose I believe in consciousness raising more than in dictatorial imposing.
Me too, but it doesn't always work.
No.
I'm an anthropologist. I'm not one of the postmodern type you mentioned. I do believe that the moon is 250,000 miles away. So in defense of my discipline, I have a question about ISIS. I believe that ISIS is what we would call in anthropology a revitalization movement, which is a reaction to people who are very unhappy with the current state of affairs in the world. And so ISIS is their attempt to try to reform society to a way that is acceptable to them. And I'd like to know what you think of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot imagine any sane person wanting to reform the world in the mold of ISIS. I mean, it seems to me to be a desire to plunge the world into a joyless misery.
Yeah, I would say not dissatisfaction with the world. It's in the Middle East or their particular areas that they live in. I think probably it's not that many people from the West that join them compared to the troops they get from those local areas.
Hi, is this on? Yes. This is an evolution question. It's a loaded question, but a real one. Given what we've learned about the Neanderthal genome and how there's a small amount of it in modern humans, except for those of African descent, why has it not started a discussion about what I think is the obvious implication that Black people are smarter and more linguistically proficient than all the rest of us? And it is a real and a serious question.
I don't quite see why you would think that. I mean, the reason why there are no Neanderthal genes in African populations is that Neanderthals were European creatures, and so it's mostly in Europeans that the Neanderthal genes are to be found. In order to draw the conclusion you draw, it would be necessary to assume that Neanderthals were somehow primitive, and therefore, I mean, I can sort of see what you're saying. It's a sort of sort of one in the eye for people who have wanted to suggest that African people are more primitive or something of that sort. But we are an African species. We originated in Africa. We exist in the rest of the world as a result of a comparatively recent diaspora out of Africa, more than one of those diasporas out of Africa. And two of those diasporas have shown a certain tendency to merge. That's why we have some Neanderthal genes in European populations, something like 4%, I think. I just don't get what you're saying. I think it's just interesting that we have a residue of Neanderthal genes.
Yeah, well, just one clarification. Some of the news coverage said the Neanderthal genes probably do more harm than good, and I think if the races were reversed, people would be saying, oh, see, it just confirms our stereotypes of...
I think that's probably true. I mean, I think that prejudice is such that if the fact was reversed, people might well have pounced on it. I think you've perhaps got a good point there.
Yeah. Thank you.
The Pew Research study, that came out recently on trends from the last 7 years in religiosity across the United States showed decreases in followership of Christianity across the board, except in one segment, and that was evangelical Protestantism. I was wondering if you two could theorize why that might be, whereas mainline Protestants and Catholics did not, or showed decreases across the...
The evangelicals offer free parking and music and chicken. I mean, I'm sort of being half facetious, but the mega churches, which are mostly evangelical, I don't know if you've ever been, but it's like a rock show. I mean, it's really quite something to go to these things, and I think it appeals in that sense. They have free babysitting to bring the kids. They have dating service. I mean, it's like a full package deal. It's like Amazon, they got everything. And I think they appeal that way more than, say, Catholics and older Protestant sects do.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm a high school student asking Michael Shermer and Richard Dawkins a question, so I'm very nervous. I would want to refer back to the example of the intelligent life. You were asking if they would have moral questioning about us, but would it be likely, because you say that the morality is Darwinianly a mistake, would it be unlikely for those intelligent life beings to have morality amongst themselves?
Well, I think that the Darwinian mistake could work. If you reverse it and imagine humans going to another world where we find aliens, would we have moral feelings toward them? Would we worry about their suffering? Would we care about their pain? I'd like to think we would, because the lust to be nice still works for any sentient being. It doesn't. Already we are nice to, some of us are anyway, to non-human animals. There's no suggestion that we have any kinship with them or anything like that. So I think that my guess would be that the human lust to be nice would generalize to alien life forms. As for what the alien morality might be, I think that's one of those places where we probably can't even guess.
In the last chapter of the Moral Arc, I talk about, I don't think a civilization could become a successful spacefaring civilization and last long enough to do anything if they were too aversive or too hostile, too bellicose, too aggressive. They'd have to have designed their societies to tilt the matrices to motivate the members to be nicer versus aggressive or whatever, which is what we've been doing ever since the Enlightenment. We've been, tweaking the social systems, the economic, political systems to get people to be nicer. Tax incentives, laws, and so forth. That's the whole purpose of those things, is to tap into our nature and say, okay, we have this dark side, we have this good side. Let's give tax incentives or breaks or whatever to get people to do more of this. And I think any successful civilization will do that. Now, stick around for the afternoon because David Brin and Greg Benford have thought a lot about this way more than we have. This is what they do for a living, but maybe they'll comment.
By the way, the last chapter of the Moral Arc is very inspiring. It's worth plowing through to the end.
Come on. It's thinner than the ancestor's tail. Oh, my God. I don't know if that was good or not.
It was good. It was good.
Hi, Professor. Could you tell us, do you think there's a biological basis for the human propensity to ignore nuance and try to create false dichotomies? And if so, how do you think we can overcome that?
Well, I like your tyranny of the
Discontinuous mind.
discontinuous mind. Yeah, I think that's your answer.
Do you think that's right, do you? I hadn't thought of it that way before. It's a very interesting thought. To ignore nuances
Maybe it's
and
easier.
go to black and white.
Yeah.
Yes, I suppose I do think that in a way. I mean, I don't know whether you've read my Tyranny of the Discontinuous Mind, but there does seem to be a tendency to want to categorize things into discrete categories rather than to see gray areas. So, for example, when talking about poverty, instead of saying how many people actually earn less than so many dollars a year and so many, you talk about the poverty line. How many people are below the poverty line? As though there is a line, as though somehow when you breast the wave, when you get over the line, you're no longer poor. And of course it is not like that. The same thing with being, adult, with being old enough to vote. For legal reasons, you have to say before the age of 18 you can't vote, after the age of 18 you can, and that varies from nation to nation, of course. But there's no sudden magical change that takes place at the stroke of midnight on your 18th birthday, and you suddenly acquire maturity of judgment and things. I think it's certainly true that we lack nuance and tend to think in terms of black and white. What I hadn't thought about was whether there's an evolutionary explanation for that.
Well, I think, Kahneman and Tversky, their whole research on behavioral economics, they use the same term you use, the rules of thumb, cognitive rules of thumb. You know, if it's this, then call it that. And I think what these categorizations are is just simplifying our cognition. You simply don't have the time to process all the information, so you just quickly, as they say,
It's fast thinking,
fast thinking, yeah. And it takes extra to push somebody to the nuance. That takes some time.
Yeah, that's a good answer, actually. Yes. Kahneman.
You just both mentioned ISIL and the tyranny and horror of that organization. But to tie it into Don Prothero's comments, isn't their development in large part due to shortages and climate change and other problems in that region that have exacerbated poverty and starvation and whatever, and created some of the elements that have caused this? And their religious...
Why would poverty make you want to be vile to women? Why would poverty make you want to ban dancing and music and fun and joy and everything that makes life worthwhile, even if you are poor? I can't understand why poverty should lead you into a dogmatic tyranny of theocracy. I could see why poverty would lead you to communism or something like that. But
And if anything, if you might be more sympathetic to people that are in plights like you because you understand it. We have time for just one more question. I lost track of the time, so just make it quick.
Yes, my experience is that since 9/11, disinformation has become almost a method in which to guide political discussions, cultural discussions, and actually may be connected with political engineering, cultural engineering. How do you see that in terms of Darwinian evolution or the evolution of thought?
I don't think I do. I'm not sure why you would bring Darwinism into that.
Yeah, that sounds pure Lamarckian or culture.
I mean, humans are a very cultural species, and we're so much governed by things which have little to do with our Darwinian past, except in a very indirect sense. So I wouldn't like to try to give a Darwinian answer to that question. I think you need to answer that in terms of history and sociology.
We're at a transition period, I think, in terms of our cultural structures and social structures, and this seems to be one element that seems to be presenting itself.
Well, I think the scientific understanding of human nature gives us a better way to structure societies, knowing that if you have this laws or these tax incentives or whatever, people are going to respond in a certain way. This is what behavioral geneticists do. This is what social scientists do, is run these experiments. How will people respond in this set of circumstances versus this, given we have this nature, flexible nature, but a certain nature. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks so much, Richard. That was terrific. Thank you. Okay, wait, no, we have two more speakers, so we got on the break. We have a break coming up, two more speakers, and then we'll have the afternoon session.